he wasn't strong because he had big muscles. He was strong because heaven had placed a secret on his life. And the moment that secret was treated like a joke, his invincibility became a trap. Everyone knows the highlight reel. Samson tearing lions apart, snapping ropes like thread, dropping Philistines like dominoes. But almost nobody talks about the darker truth underneath the legend. Because Samson's strength wasn't a flex, it was a vow. And the tragedy is that the man anointed to deliver Israel slowly became addicted to the very things destroying him. This is the story of a man who could break chains but couldn't break patterns. A man who terrified armies but couldn't resist temptation. A story that proves God can empower someone mightily even while they are quietly falling apart. And yes, his hair matters, but not for the reason most people think. By the time Samson is born, Israel isn't just in trouble, Israel is comfortable in trouble. They're living under Philistine control, not constant open warfare, but oppressive dominance, intimidation, restrictions, cultural pressure, and the slow, crushing weight of a godless people ruling God's people. It is the kind of oppression that doesn't always look like chains until you try to walk away. And once again, Israel drifts. They compromise, they blend in, they start learning Philistine ways, Philistine appetites, Philistine gods, until the line between us and them becomes blurry. So God does what he often does in that era. He raises a deliverer, not a king, not a general, not a trained warrior, a baby. Samson's story begins with a couple who cannot have children, Manoah and his wife. Then, suddenly, an angel of the Lord appears with an announcement that feels less like a celebration and more like a warning. They are told they will have a son, and he will begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines.
But the promise comes with conditions. The child must be a Nazirite from birth. That means a vow of separation, set apart for God's purposes. No wine or strong drink, no unclean food, no razor to touch his head. Samson's life would carry a visible sign that he belonged to God. Here is the first hard truth. Samson's strength was never a personality trait. It was an assignment. The power was never meant to make him famous. It was meant to make Israel free. Samson grows, and the Spirit of the Lord begins to move on him. Almost immediately, the story shows us his weakness, not in battle, but in desire. He travels to Timnah, sees a Philistine woman, and demands that his parents get her for him. They object because they understand something Samson refuses to see. You cannot marry into the very oppression God called you to fight. But Samson insists. That sets the tone for his entire life. God keeps calling him upward, and Samson keeps leaning downward. On the way, a young lion attacks him. The Spirit of the Lord empowers him, and he tears the lion apart with his bare hands. Later, he returns and finds honey inside the lion's carcass. He scoops it out and eats it, even giving some to his parents without telling them where it came from. It may seem small, but it shows spiritual drift. He is touching what is unclean, playing with what he was meant to avoid, treating consecration casually.
And that becomes his pattern. God gives power, Samson gets careless, he hides the compromise and assumes the anointing will cover what obedience should have corrected. At his wedding feast, he creates a riddle based on the lion and the honey. When the Philistines cannot solve it, they pressure his bride. She pressures Samson. He gives in. The secret gets out, and Samson explodes in rage. He kills men to pay off the wager and storms away furious. It looks like strength, but underneath it is instability. He is not fighting with strategy, he is reacting with anger. Rage can look like power until it becomes the leash someone else uses to control you. Later, Samson goes into Gaza and sleeps with a prostitute. The enemy surrounds the city to ambush him. He wakes up, rips the gates off the city, and carries them away. It looks like victory, but he is still wandering into enemy territory, feeding the same desires dragging him down. He is strong, but he is not free. That is the dark truth about Samson's strength. Power without purity does not produce deliverance, it produces delay.
Then comes Delilah. The Philistine rulers offer her money to discover the secret of his strength. She doesn't attack him with an army. She attacks him with intimacy. Again and again, she asks him for the secret. He lies. She tests him. He breaks free. And somehow, he stays. Because Samson does not just have a Delilah problem, he has a pattern problem, a discernment problem, a consecration problem. He keeps getting closer to the line, thinking the line is about hair, when it was always about the heart. His hair was never a magical battery. It was a sign of his covenant with God, a visible reminder that he belonged to the Lord. But Delilah keeps pressing him until he is worn down, and finally he tells her the truth. She cuts his hair while he sleeps. The Philistines rush in. Samson wakes up and says he will shake himself free like before. But this time, something is different. He does not know that the Lord has left him. That is the real tragedy. Not the haircut, not the loss of muscles. The presence of God is gone, and he does not even notice. He had grown used to living on yesterday's anointing. The Philistines seize him. They gouge out his eyes. They bind him in chains and force him to grind grain like an animal. The man who once carried city gates cannot even see where he is walking. Sin does that. It blinds you before it binds you. But then something small happens. His hair begins to grow again. Not because hair is magic, but because God is merciful. Later, the Philistines gather in their temple to celebrate. They bring Samson out to mock him. Blind, weak, and humbled, Samson finally does what he never did while he was strong. He prays. Not a confident prayer, a desperate one. He asks God to remember him and give him strength one last time. And God answers. Samson pushes against the pillars with everything he has. The temple collapses, the leaders fall, and Samson dies with them. He kills more in his death than in his life. It is victory, but it is costly. Deliverance through tragedy. He could have been a long-term liberator, but instead he became a last-second weapon. Here is the dark truth about Samson's strength. His strength was never about him. It was about God's purpose. His calling was real, but so were his compromises. He was empowered, but not disciplined. And when he treated consecration casually, he discovered that power is not the same as presence. Samson's life warns us that you can be gifted and still be trapped. You can be used by God and still be enslaved by habits. You can look unstoppable publicly while privately falling apart. But it also shows us that even at the bottom, God still hears a surrendered heart. Our Delilah may not be a person. It might be a secret habit, a compromise, bitterness, or pride. And like Samson, we can assume we will always shake ourselves free. But the strongest people are not the ones who lift the most. They are the ones who say no when temptation whispers yes. So ask yourself, where have you been treating consecration casually? Where have you been assuming God's power will cover what obedience would fix? If you want more stories like this, subscribe and stay with us, because God can still use a person mightily, but He would rather make you whole.